Abonema, also known as Iyemoni, fondly called York City by the locals, is a historic town in Rivers State, Nigeria. It was founded in 1882 by 4 major chieftaincy houses of the Kalabari ethnic group. These houses were led by Chief Ekine Bob Manuel, Chief Young Briggs, Chief Akpana Judgewell, and Chief Kaladokubo Standfast Jack. Chief Ekine Bob Manuel sat on the Owukori Manuel stool and later became the first ruler, Amanyanabo of Abonema, by right of having the oldest stool. Situated within the tropical rainforest zone, the climate is humid and experiences a wet season from March to November, as well as a dry season from late November to March. Situated along the Sombrero River, one of the major tributaries of the Niger Delta leading to the Atlantic Ocean, Abonema became a significant seaport and commercial hub for fish and farm produce. It had the first seaport in eastern Nigeria, trading with the Portuguese and the British in palm oil, lime juice, kennels, and supplying mine props for collieries in Enugu. Although trade relations between the Portuguese and the Calabaris were relatively brief in comparison to the long-term relations with the British, there were, however, some lasting legacies marking their presence. Significant among these was the Euro-African architectural edifice of the royal palace of the first paramount ruler, the Amanyanabo of Abonema. The royal palace of Abonema was built by Portuguese artisans 2 years after the Kalabari Ijors migrated to their current location from the old shipping.
This building was completed in 1884. It could have been started about 1883. The reason for the construction was to provide an administrative headquarters for the Abonema community and also a residence for the King of Abonema.
It reflects a hybrid architectural style of Portuguese Gaiola and Ijaw vernacular architecture.
The symbolism there, I think, can only be related to the way we do our things. You can see that there are separate levels. There's the ground level, there is the first floor, and then there's the penthouse. It clearly shows that the king had his own quarters. And he had also areas, the dam floor was for the administration of the community. If you check there, you will see things like safes and orders and cannonballs. That's where he kept those things. The upper floor was his living quarters, and then the top, the penthouse, was where he stayed to look at the entire community. In those days, we didn't have so many houses there. If he stayed up there, he would be able to see almost the entire Abonema.
My area of specialty is in vernacular and heritage architecture. What inspired me to work on this particular piece of architecture, this beautiful heritage built form, was that in 2016, I was commissioned by a federal government grant to study or document pieces of colonial architecture scattered around the cartographic Niger Delta region of Nigeria, which is within the southern part of Nigeria, but falls within the actual deltaic shape in the southern part of Nigeria. And so it comprised primarily of 3 states in the country. And so that was Rivers State, Bayelsa State, and Delta State. While undertaking field work in all these 3 areas, we came across a series of buildings, but there was one in particular in Akukutori local government in Rivers State that stood out. This building was built with timber, which was different from every other building that we had then. Most of them were brick structures, but this was completely different. It was built out of timber. And this building had historical relevance because it's about 140 years old to it, and then it had rarity. It was rare because it was designed and built by Portuguese, and what we have in that region of the deltaic region, in that particular sombrero axis, and what constitutes of Akukutori local government now, is buildings that are more inclined towards the British style of architecture. But this was predominantly Portuguese. And so these are the things that wanted me to take a closer look at this particular heritage architecture.
This structure is reminiscent of traditional Portuguese timber craftsmanship, but cladded in corrugated metal sheets rather than the typical masonry reminiscent of the Portuguese version. It features remarkable three-dimension timber framework, which is a characteristic of traditional Portuguese architecture that utilizes timber for construction due to the earthquakes and seismic activities in those regions.
Having observed this piece of architecture way back 2016, in 2022, I decided to apply for a research grant and were awarded one from the Gerda Henkel Foundation in Germany. It was a pre-conservation research grant. And what that grant entailed was we were to study this particular piece of architecture and one or other building to see the possibilities for conservation or restoration of this particular piece of architecture. At this point, the building is already deflecting. It had started degenerating. There was a lot of wear and tear over time for this particular building. And so it became a necessity for this building to be preserved for future generations to see. It's primarily because of its rarity and its relevance, like I mentioned earlier.
The material of choice for this iconic building was the native akawai.
In terms of architectural style and influence, it takes a lot from the typical Portuguese traditional styled architecture, the gaiola. These are timber buildings that were designed in the 18th century, 19th century. What made it quite possible to be built in Abonema is the abundance of timber. And Abonema had, at that time, a mangrove forest that was laden with akawai, which is the traditional name for the ironwood. And so what the Portuguese did was simply harvest some of this ironwood, transport it to Portugal, season it, cut it, pre-cut it, redesign the entire building, ship it back in boxes into Abonema, and assemble the building on site based on supervision from the Portuguese artisans and then using local labor. However, that is for the building itself, the entire building envelope. The spaces, the design of this building has a lot of character of a typical Ijaw vernacular architecture. And so it infused the generative concept of the Ijaw vernacular architecture into the Portuguese Pombelino gaiola. And so what we have, the spaces are grid-like patterns that are typical of migrant fishing architecture, and then the open plan systems that we have there as well. So this is a combination of two cultures being fused together into something quite beautiful.
The Royal Palace in Abonnema is strategically located at the heart of the town. It was originally situated in a north-south orientation before the Sombrero River, which served as the major entry point into the town, and a creek which served as the emergency exit route.
In our tradition, the king and the heads of the war canoe houses always located their buildings towards the little creeks and not in front of the community. The reason is that if there is an attack, the armada of the attackers will be coming from the front of the community. So they were recessed to the back of the community. So their people, their children and their wards and their slaves and their soldiers will keep fighting before it gets to them. So that's why you see this is at the back. And if you go around all through to Jack, Uruwari, that's Breaks, Georgeville, all the paramount heads and the paramount heads of the war canoe houses, they are all on the same line, while their children and their wards are in front of the sombrero.
The palace building has a total footprint of 190 square meters and sports 3 floors, including a pent floor. The building measures 17.37 meters in length and 10.95 meters in width. The original design consists of a wraparound veranda with circular hollow section stanchions made of steel spaced 2.7 meters apart as structural support system. It was accessed by a pair of double-leaf timber-slated jalousie doors for the entrance and a single-leaf jalousie for the rear-end exit door. It also had an opening on the west wing leading to the detached kitchen area. 2 straight-flight timber staircases were installed on the west wing facade and the rear of the east wing respectively as access points to the king's private chambers on the top floor. Another straight-flight staircase leads to the 10th floor, which served both as a balcony and watchtower.
Buildings of the wives of the king. All his wives were accommodated in buildings all around him. And the wives were women who looked after, who took responsibility for his children. For instance, if he married Mrs. B, he could adopt another girl or boy and give to Mrs. B to look after. So whoever comes in, whoever he begets, goes to those women. So in our system, we have that kind of nomenclature where the wives look after the children and the people that they have inherited.
The building is symmetrical with intricate facade elements such as a layered cladding of timber sheets, metal-cut ornamental friezes, and top-floor panoramic windows with fretting, creating a pattern of interest. At the main entrance to the palace, 2 rusted war cannons with gold stamps are inclined on concrete props in fire release position. They are culturally significant and were acquired in exchange for 200 men each during the slave trade.
Usually, what our people do, especially the king, what he does is that he's a trader, okay? And he would authorize people to go and trade. And then he will give them his flag with which they can go and trade. If you don't have that flag from him or any of the paramount heads, the white men may not even listen to you because it's like, who is your guarantor? So when it comes to payment, we give them goods and services. And then they give us what they have. It was trade by barter, as it were. So for this building, in most parts, we paid sometimes with lime juice, sometimes with timber, sometimes with oil, sometimes with slaves, depending on what the merchant wants. At that time, the slave trade was at its peak and was actually coming down, but it was still in place. So if you wanted to do such businesses, the trading partners would tell you what they wanted for exchange. And whatever they brought in for us, we had to pay them in one way or the other.
The building has a raised concrete ground floor of 330 millimeters, designed to protect against flooding. To cushion the effect of driving rain, the original wraparound veranda was covered with the remnants of the corrugated sheets, apparently by less skillful indigenous artisans in the 1910s.
We had specific spaces where sleeping areas, which were on the ground floor, and there was a central, what we'll call a living area. However, it's in the Ijaw parlance will be warikuri. It's almost like everything happens within that area. They eat within that area. And that particular area, the warikuri, has direct links to the kitchen, which is where food is prepared for the entire household of the Amanyanabo himself. At the top floor was the Amanyanyabo's personal quarters. Based on our observations on site, it's an open plan facility at the top of the building. Then there is the very, very interesting piece of architecture that also makes this work very, very unique, is the inclusion of a pen suite or a penthouse. Now, the penthouse we discovered was not a living area, but primarily designed as an observatory. And what was the intention or the intended purpose of the pen suite was that if there was an approaching boat, ship, or even an armada, the sentry would raise an alarm, and first of all, the king himself would be evacuated through the creek at the back. And so the pen suite served a very interesting purpose.
The doors suit the tropical weather of Abonnema by welcoming the cool river breeze to ventilate the palace. There are 4 single window openings on the facade, asymmetrically placed in pairs on both sides of the entrance doors.
So we just talked about the design layout itself, but in terms of the unique design features of this particular building, there were a few that jump out at you when you look at it. And one of them is the carved windows. And they were ribbon-like carved windows, ribbon windows that gave a panoramic view of the entire location. And that was at the top floor, the first floor of the entire building. These windows were carved, and they were sliding windows. It was one of the first times we saw sliding windows used in that particular style, which was quite interesting. Prior to that, no building around that area had any such architectural feature. And then there was the phrases. These phrases served like skirtings between the first floor and the ground floor. It's like a band around the entire building. And it was made out of cut sheet metal and designed with some level of ornamentation in mind. But this particular type of phrases were reminiscent of Portuguese architecture. We've seen pockets of them in other places around Nigeria and other parts of West Africa. In as far away as Senegal, it could be spotted in the Gore Island. And so bits of Portuguese influences were seen and in all of these areas, and they bear serious semblance to what we saw in this particular building. Also, there was the use of corrugated roofing sheets as cladding. Corrugated sheets apparently served as a form of rain, what preserved the building, the timber frame itself, from wear and tear over time. So the steel corrugated sheets protected the outer part of the entire building. And it was used mostly at the top floor, from the window sill down to where the phrases formed the skirting. And also, above the windows at the top floor, or the first floor, was a very unique piece of architectural feature that could only be compared to Pombelino Gaiola's, which was the 3-dimensional frontal style. The 3-dimensional frontal style is a way in which timber is placed in an asterix format to give it structural stability. And that could be used both as framework in the walls, but in this particular case, it was used as a framework for the lintels that held the entire roof structure. So these are some of the key architectural features that could be seen around this building.
The main lounge has a rectangular shape and serves as the concourse to 4 rooms distributed in pairs on each side. This spatial layout is typical of the Ijaw modular system of design. The rear end door and another leading to the kitchen on the left wing make up the exits on the ground floor. The outdoor kitchen till this day still has the steel cauldron, which was used to prepare food for the king and his household. Further additions were made to the building, such as the ground floor safe, built in 1956 with the inscription above 10-5-56. This is the only concrete structure in the building besides the raised foundation floor. The safe contains a portmanteau briefcase, some carved masks, and wooden figurines.
I am Okori IX. The first person to use it was Okori II. That is His Royal Highness Bob Manuel himself. He was the one who came from the old shipping, we call it old shipping, where we initially settled, the Kalabari people, before he came here. So he was the one who first inhabited that building in 1884. He was followed by Disraeli Bowo Bob Manuel the first, was the second person who inhabited it, and a good number of them did. By the time Gladstone came on board, Gladstone actually built a big story building just in front there, but it's now broken. He lived there, and since after that, none of the kings have actually occupied there because the place was getting into disrepair. But I'm sure at a certain point we will have a new official palace for the king built. My predecessor had his own place, his predecessor had his own place, I have my own place. But as time goes on, we will get somewhere that is permanent for everybody else.
A memorial hall was also built near the tomb in 1904, where the first paramount ruler was laid to rest.
Why we need to restore these buildings are for several reasons. Primarily, these buildings serve as our architectural legacy. They are our heritage. And the community itself, Abonnema, wanted to convert this particular piece of architecture into a museum if the preservation or conservation works are done.
Well, we would love to turn it into something close to a museum where people would come and visit, where people will come and see what existed several years ago and how the people lived and all that. So it will not go to waste. We will, in fact, we have plans to ensure that we even encourage visitors when they come to Abonema or Kalabari or River State, that come to Abonema, you will see so and so and so. It's very important for us. It will add to the tourist value of our community.
One of the key reasons for us pushing for restoration of this building is that based on the age of the building, it should come into one of those listed buildings in Nigeria. It should be listed and declared as a national monument. There are very few buildings with about over 100-year and 140-year mark as this building has had, in terms of rarity, in terms of time, in terms of cultural and historical significance. And it still stands as a historically significant building in its own right. And so preserving this building would help cement our legacy. It will help protect our material culture. It will help preserve our heritage for posterity. And also as a piece of architecture for study, because the combination of forms and cultural mix that has produced this particular building is something worth investigating. And that's really why this whole project started in the first place. And this is why we believe that we need to carry it on to a very good logical conclusion, which is by preserving it in the long run.
Conclusion. The 1884 Amanyanabo Palace in Abonnema is an iconic legacy of Euro-African relations in the late 19th century, and despite its current state of dilapidation, it still stands over a century as a reminder of how foreign architectural styles can be incorporated into local designs. It also underlines the national design pandemic of underutilized building materials such as the akawai wood in the palace, and raises questions about the exploration and development of local building materials in Nigeria. The palace serves as a beacon of reference for evaluating the state of things in the present day and promoting a mindset of quality building conversation for posterity. It stands till this day, spanning over a century, to bequeath a cultural and architectural legacy transcending generations of kingship in Abonema town and the Kalabari kingdom at large.
This pre-conservation study was made possible by the generous funding from the Gerda Henkel Foundation in Germany. But it couldn't come to fruition without the help of the amazing team I had on my side. And that was my main research assistant, Dr. Chizi Akani, who worked in terms of architectural drafting for everything that had to do with the architectural draftings of the buildings and all. And my postgraduate students, Karina Dambo, who worked in actual field work collecting data. We also have Victory Matthias, that worked also, postgraduate student, and we also have a native of Abonnema, but also one of my postgraduate students, Bob Manuel Williams. And these people came together to make sure that we're able to collect data, analyze the data, and put everything together. We also have an amazing documentary crew headed by Fortune and his entire team, and that was able to piece all the work together, drone shots, photography, and all the amazing things to put this entire documentary together. But we also had serious help from two architects that are natives of Abonnema, and that's architect Peter Dateme and architect Lawson Amanyanabo. They were our go-between us and the community. They gave us access. They were the gateway for us to be able to reach the paramount ruler, the current Amanyanabo of Abonnema, and his entire council of chief. And also I want to use this opportunity in this documentary to thank the paramount ruler of Abonnema, His Royal Majesty, the Israel Bob Manuel.
Bakumae